The tarmac didn't just vibrate, it groaned under the weight of an incoming storm. At Seattle General, the morning was supposed to be defined by the rhythmic clicking of keyboards and the sterile smell of floor wax. But then, the sky over the city didn't just cloud over, it tore open. 4 matte black MH-60M Blackhawk helicopters, stripped of markings except for ghost gray serial numbers, descended in a combat staggered formation, usually reserved for the high-risk extractions of Tier 1 operators. As the rotors whipped the hospital parking lot into a frenzy of gravel and shredded asphalt, the security team scrambled. They were used to unruly patients, not a military invasion. But as the side doors slid open before the wheels even touched the ground, 12 Force Recon Marines, clad in full-plate carriers, fast helmets, and carrying suppressed M4 carbines, hit the deck with the precision of a scalpel. Inside the ER, Elena Vance, formerly Clara, moved with a heavy rhythmic limp that served as the soundtrack to her perceived failure. To the world, she was a 40-year-old nurse with titanium pins in her leg and a slow reputation. She was the woman relegated to the non-critical drunks and the endless cycle of bedpans because she couldn't run to a code blue. "Move it, Vance, you're a breathing roadblock," Dr. Julian Prescott snapped, his jawline as sharp as his ego was inflated. He was the hospital's golden boy, a trauma surgeon who treated the like his personal kingdom and Elena like a piece of broken furniture. Elena didn't flinch. She had been screamed at by the finest drill sergeants the Marine Corps had to offer. Prescott's arrogance was just background noise compared to the roar of a mortar shell. While Prescott prepped for a VIP car crash victim with his typical theatrical flair, Elena's eyes were on the monitors. She didn't just see numbers, she saw patterns. She saw a teenager in Bay 1 crashing before the alarms even shrieked. "Check his right lung, doctor. The trachea is deviating," she said, her voice low and steady. Prescott didn't even look up. "Did I ask for a consult from the peanut gallery? Get me 2 units of O negative and shut your mouth," he hissed. He thought he was dismissing a nurse. He didn't realize he was silencing a recipient of the Navy Cross. But as the first heavy thud of a combat boot hit the ER's linoleum floor, the hospital's hierarchy was about to be burned to the ground. The Marines weren't here for a doctor. They were here for Angel 6. The heavy double doors of the ER didn't just open. They were kicked off their hinges with a violent crack that silenced every heart monitor in the room. The air grew cold as 3 Marines entered first, sweeping their rifles in a deadly, synchronized dance that froze the staff in their tracks. These weren't patrol officers. They were predators in high-end tactical gear, night vision goggles flipped up, and eyes that had seen the end of the world. "Everybody stay exactly where you are," a voice boomed, amplified by a tactical throat mic, hands visible. Dr. Julian Prescott, his gloves stained with the blood of the teenager he was failing to save, marched toward them with his usual misplaced bravado. "Who do you think you are?" he demanded, his face flushing with rage. "This is a hospital. I have a patient dying, and you're barging in here with weapons." The lead Marine, a mountain of a man named Captain Silas Thorne, didn't even blink. He stepped into Prescott's personal space and shoved him back with a single, dismissive hand that sent the surgeon stumbling 5 feet. "I am Captain Silas Thorne, United States Marine Corps," the giant roared. "And I am not here for your patient, doctor. I am here for my soldier." Prescott sputtered, looking around for security that had already been disarmed. "We don't have any military admits today. You have the wrong hospital." Thorne ignored him, pulling a folded piece of paper from his tactical vest. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the terrified faces of the nurses until they stopped at the back of the station. "I am looking for a former service member," Thorne announced, his voice echoing off the sterile tiles. "Her name is Elena Vance. In the Corps, she was known as Angel 6. A collective gasp rippled through the ER. Every head turned toward the break room door where the slow nurse stood holding a cup of stale coffee, Prescott let out a breathless, mocking laugh. Vance, the janitor nurse, he sneered, looking at Thorne. You landed 4 helicopters for the woman who empties bedpans. Thorne's gaze turned lethal, the air in the room dropping 10 degrees. He took a predatory step toward Prescott. Watch your tone, civilian, he hissed. You are speaking about a recipient of the Navy Cross. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena set her coffee down, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hadn't heard that call sign in 7 years. She looked at Thorne, seeing the desperation behind his military mask. She knew that look, someone was in trouble, bad trouble. I'm here, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. As she stepped forward, the limping nurse vanished and the legend emerged. The room felt smaller as Elena stepped into the light, the rhythmic thud drag of her limp sounding like a countdown. Captain Thorne snapped to attention, his combat boots slamming together with a crack that made the triage nurses jump. He offered a crisp, razor-sharp salute to the woman Prescott had spent months belittling. Ma'am, Thorne said, his voice thick with a respect that no one in this building had ever shown her. Captain Thorne, 1st Recon. We have a catastrophic situation in the field, and the flight surgeon is down. 7 Marines are bleeding out in a ravine 30 miles north, and the weather is turning into a graveyard. Elena stared at the man, her mind already shifting gears from hospital protocols to combat triage. I haven't flown in 7 years, Captain, she said, her voice regaining the authoritative cadence of a lieutenant commander. My leg, it's not what it was. Thorne didn't flinch. We don't need your legs, ma'am. We need your hands, and we need the brain that earned the Navy Cross. Commander Ricks is among the fallen. He's critical, and his unit radioed that they wouldn't let anyone touch them except Angel 6. The mention of Ricks was like a lightning strike to her soul. He was the man who had carried her through the dust of Kandahar on a broken back. The slow nurse evaporated instantly. In her place stood a lethal predator of the medical world. My kit, she asked. On the bird, Thorne replied. We leave in 120 seconds. Holloway, Prescott roared, finally finding his voice. You walk out those doors and you're fired. You're on shift, you're a subordinate, and you're abandoning your post. Elena stopped and turned slowly, her gaze so cold it seemed to freeze the blood in Prescott's veins. She walked up to the star surgeon, reached into her pocket, and dropped her hospital ID into his pristine white lab coat. Dr. Prescott, she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, that boy in Bay 1 has a tension pneumothorax. Needle decompress him now, or you'll be the one explaining to his senator father why he died because of your ego. She leaned in closer, her eyes flashing with a steel-hard glint. As for firing me, I resign. She turned to Thorne without another word. Let's go. The transition from the sterile, fluorescent hum of the hospital to the violent roar of the MH-60M Blackhawk was instantaneous. As the helicopter cleared the hospital roof, the city of Seattle became a blur of gray and green below. Elena Vance sat on the edge of the troop seat, her useless leg locked into place, while Captain Thorne's men worked with mechanical speed to prep her gear. They handed her a tan flight suit and a plate carrier emblazoned with a medic's cross. 20 minutes out, ma'am, Thorne yelled over the bone-shaking scream of the twin engines. He handed her a ruggedized tablet showing a topographical map of the North Cascades. The crash site is at 7,000 feet, a deep ravine we call the Devil's Throat. The weather is a mess, visibility is dropping to 0, and the wind shear is hitting 60 knots. We can't land. It's a high-angle hoist extraction or nothing. Elena didn't hesitate. She began checking the seals on the trauma kits, her hands moving with a fluid, lethal precision that hadn't been seen in years. She checked the vials of TXA, the chest seals, and the portable monitors. What's the tactical situation? She asked, her voice steady despite the bird pitching violently in a sudden downdraft. Thorne's face darkened. Hostile, we were tracking a splinter cell of mercenaries moving high-value assets. They got a lucky shot off with a MANPADS. Rick's bird went down hard. My team is on the ground providing a perimeter, but they're pinned. The DSHK heavy machine guns on the ridges are making it a kill zone. Elena looked out the open bay door. The clouds were thick, dark, and angry, swirling like a cauldron of smoke. Most pilots would have turned back, but these were the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. They didn't turn back. "We are going in hot," the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Suddenly, the helicopter banked so hard Elena felt the G-force pressing her into the frame. Tracers, bright streaks of red light, began reaching up from the darkness of the forest below, seeking the belly of the beast. The Blackhawks' door gunners opened up, the heavy thud-thud-thud of the .50 cal machine guns vibrating through Elena's teeth. "Hook up!" Thorne screamed. Elena clipped her harness to the hoist cable. She looked down into the abyss. Somewhere down there, in the freezing mud and rain, her brothers were dying. She didn't feel the pain in her leg anymore. She felt the adrenaline of a predator returning to the hunt. With a final nod to Thorne, she stepped out into the empty air, plunging into the dark heart of the storm. The descent was a chaotic blur of freezing rain and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of heavy machine gun fire echoing off the canyon walls. Elena swung at the end of the hoist cable, a lone shadow dropping into a cauldron of fire. Below her, the Devil's Throat was lit by the skeletal orange glow of the burning wreckage. As her boots hit the jagged rocks, she didn't stumble. The adrenaline had effectively silenced the phantom pains in her leg. "Angel 6 is on the deck," a voice screamed through the radio static. Elena unhooked herself and immediately went into a low crawl. Tracers zipped overhead, snapping through the trees like angry hornets. She reached the perimeter where 3 Marines were crouched behind a fallen cedar tree, their rifles spitting fire toward the ridgeline. In the center of the mud and twisted metal lay Commander Rickson. He was gray, his breathing shallow, a hollowed-out version of the man who had once been the toughest instructor in the Corps. "Get back, they've got the wreckage zeroed in," a corporal yelled, but Elena ignored him. She slid into the mud beside Rickson, her hands already tearing open his combat vest. "Talk to me, Dave," she whispered, her voice a calm anchor in the middle of the storm. Rickson's eyes fluttered, focusing on her for a split second. "Clara, Elena, you're late," he wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Elena didn't waste time with words. She saw the arterial spray, a femoral hit. She jammed her knee into his groin to compress the artery while her hands worked with a speed that would have made Dr. Prescott's head spin. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a combat technician performing a miracle in a graveyard. Suddenly, a mortar shell landed 50 yards away, showering them in dirt and shrapnel. The mercenaries were closing in, realizing the rescuers were pinned down. "Captain, I need a curtain of lead on that north ridge now," Elena barked into the radio, not even looking up as she started a field transfusion. She was working in the dark, in the mud, with bullets flying inches from her head. To the people at Seattle General, she was a broken woman who couldn't keep up. But here, in the mouth of hell, Elena Vance was the only thing standing between the Reaper and the men who called her a legend. She wasn't just saving a life, she was reclaiming her soul. The Devil's Throat had become a symphony of violence. Above, the Blackhawks orbited like hungry vultures, their miniguns spitting continuous streams of lead to keep the mercenaries back. Below, in the mud and the dark, Elena Vance was creating a sanctuary of life in the middle of a graveyard. Rickson's blood pressure was cratering. The field transfusion wasn't enough. The internal shrapnel was shredding his iliac artery. "I need a light," Elena screamed over the roar of a nearby mortar impact. Captain Thorne positioned himself over her, holding a tactical flashlight between his teeth while he reloaded his rifle with one hand. "I'm going in," Elena muttered. With no sterile field and only the rain for a scrub, She used a combat blade to widen the entry wound. She reached into Rickson's pelvic cavity, her fingers slick with hot blood, searching for the source of the hemorrhage. The Marines around her held their breath. This wasn't a hospital procedure. This was a desperate gamble against the Reaper. Her fingers closed around a pulsating vessel. "Found it," she gasped. She applied a hemostatic clamp by feel alone, the metal cold against her skin. Rickson's monitor, a ruggedized unit clipped to her vest, chirped a steadying rhythm. The bleeding stopped. "Target at 2 o'clock, Thorne roared, firing a burst that dropped a mercenary creeping through the undergrowth just 20 feet away. "We have to move him now," Elena shouted. "The clamp won't hold if we're jostled too much. I need a hard litter extraction." As the hoist cable descended again, the wind whipped into a hurricane-strength frenzy. The pilot's voice crackled. "We've got a SAM, surface-to-air missile, lock. We can't hover much longer. You've got 60 seconds or we're breaking off." Elena looked at Rickson, then at the cable. She didn't have time to secure him to the litter. "Hook us both up," she commanded. Thorne stared at her. "Ma'am, that's a suicide drag." "That's an order, Captain." Elena's voice was pure steel. She wrapped her arms around Rickson, locking her broken leg around his torso to create a human splint, and clipped her harness into the primary carabiner. As the cable began to winch them up, they were jerked into the air, spinning over the burning wreckage, while bullets traced lines of fire through the night sky. She was holding a man's life together with her bare hands, dangling 100 feet above a war zone. The Blackhawks' cabin was a chaotic storm of red light, shouting voices, and the smell of ozone and iron. Elena had been winched up through a curtain of fire, and the moment her boots hit the metal floor, she didn't collapse. She didn't breathe. She immediately dropped back over Rickson's body. The clamp she had placed by feel in the mud was still holding, but his heart was struggling against the trauma of the high-altitude ascent. "Stabilize the bird," Elena roared at the crew chief. "I need a steady platform or he's gone." As the pilot banked hard to evade a final infrared missile lock, Elena began the most high-stakes surgery of her life, performed at 120 knots in a vibrating steel box. She was no longer the limping nurse that Seattle General looked down upon. She was a combat goddess, directing 3 elite Marines to act as her surgical assistants. One held the light, one squeezed the blood bags, and Thorne himself held Rickson's shoulders still. "He's bradying down," Thorne yelled, watching the monitor. "Not on my watch," Elena hissed. She didn't have a defibrillator suited for this vibration. She used a precordial thump, a controlled, powerful strike to the chest to jumpstart the rhythm. Rickson's heart shuddered, then caught. The steady beep-beep-beep returned. "Jutter's dog." By the time the 4 Blackhawks crested the skyline of downtown Seattle, the city was waking up to a mystery. The news cameras were already pointed at the hospital roof. When the lead bird touched down, the ER doors burst open. Dr. Julian Prescott was there, flanked by security and the hospital board, ready to hand out reprimands and legal threats. But the man who stepped off the helicopter first wasn't a doctor. It was Captain Thorne, his face smeared with soot and blood. He stepped aside, and then came the stretcher. Elena Vance was at the head, her flight suit stained dark with the blood of a hero, her movements fast and commanding. Prescott stepped forward, his face red. "Vance, do you have any idea what you've done? This is a violation of..." He didn't finish. Thorne's hand shot out, grabbing Prescott by the collar and lifting him nearly off his feet. "Shut up," Thorne whispered, his voice vibrating with a menace that silenced the entire rooftop. "You are looking at the woman who just did what you aren't brave enough to dream of. Move or be moved." Elena didn't even look at Prescott. "Or 4, now I'm scrubbing in," she commanded the residents. And for the first time in the hospital's history, no one dared to ask for her credentials. They simply followed the legend. The surgery lasted 6 grueling hours. Elena Vance didn't sit down once. The titanium pins in her legs screamed with every shift of her weight, but she didn't feel the pain. She only felt the steady, stubborn pulse of Commander Rickson beneath her fingertips. When she finally stepped out of the operating room, the sunrise was beginning to bleed over the Seattle skyline. The waiting area was no longer filled with the usual hushed murmurs. It was packed. A platoon of Marines stood in a silent, rigid formation along the wall. In the center stood the hospital board of directors and a very pale Dr. Julian Prescott. "The commander is stable," Elena said, her voice cracking with exhaustion but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "He's a fighter. He'll be back on his feet before the month is out." Captain Thorne stepped forward, removing his beret. "Ma'am, the Corps hasn't been the same since you left. General Sterling has been informed of your actions tonight. Your medical discharge has been officially reviewed and overturned. If you want it, there is a colonel's bird waiting for you at the Pentagon. We need you to lead the next generation of combat medics." Elena looked at her hands that had been dismissed as too slow just 24 hours ago. Then she looked at Dr. Prescott. "You told me I was a breathing roadblock, Doctor," she said, her voice cold and precise. "You were right. I'm the roadblock that stands between my brothers and the grave. And you're just a man with a title. I'm a Marine." She didn't wait for his apology. She didn't need it. Elena Vance walked out of Seattle General for the last time. She didn't look back at the sterile gray floors or the ego-driven hallways. As she stepped into the crisp morning air, she saw the Blackhawks warming up on the pad, their rotors humming a song of redemption. She wasn't the limping nurse anymore. She was Angel 6, and she was going home. "Are you still sitting there?" That was the story of a woman who was dismissed, disrespected, and discarded, until the world realized she was the only one who could save them. If you believe that true strength isn't about how fast you run, but how hard you fight, then destroy that like button right now. We want to see Angel 6 flooding the comments. Tell us you're part of the elite squad. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Do you want to miss the next time the sky tears open? Hit the bell icon and join the ranks of the legends. Be relentless, be unstoppable. We'll see you in the next drop.